Today you'll learn about the most incredible plane landings in history and see them because they were caught on camera. After watching this episode till the end, you'll learn what pilots sometimes have to face and how they show themselves in seemingly unresolvable situations.
Birds.
Whoa.
One of the most incredible emergency landings in aviation history took place on January 15, 2009. On that day, a U.S. Airways Airbus A320-214 was on a flight from New York to Charlotte to Seattle. There were 150 passengers and 5 crew members on board. The first stage of takeoff went well, but just a minute and a half after takeoff, the plane collided with a flock of Canada geese. Some of the birds managed to fly around the plane, but some hit the engines, and the engines failed. It was obvious that it was impossible to continue the flight, so it was decided to land the aircraft immediately. The aircraft's pilot in command, Chelsea Sullenberger, began looking for places on the ground where the plane could land, but finding no options, he decided to ditch in the Hudson River in New York. The maneuver was extremely dangerous. As you know, jumping belly down into the water, even from a low height, is very painful because of the surface tension of the water. Now, imagine a multi-ton airplane moving at high speed and ditching belly down on the water. The pilots had to maneuver and ditch the aircraft with incredible precision, because if the plane had tilted slightly and one of the wings had hit the water before the fuselage, the plane would have simply been torn apart. Fortunately, Sullenberger was an experienced pilot. He masterfully ditched the airliner in the Hudson River. And although the ditching was far from the softest, all the people on board survived. After ditching, the passengers and crew evacuated the plane and stood on its wings, where they waited for rescue workers to arrive. In terms of the number of people on board, this flight ranks first in the history of no fatal crashes. No wonder the incident was dubbed the Miracle on the Hudson, and the pilot in command and the rest of the crew were hailed as national heroes. An airplane can be landed on its belly not only on water but also on land. But is it possible to avoid a disaster and save the lives of all passengers and crew members in this case? You'll learn about this very soon. Prepare to see one of the most fantastic landings in the history of aviation. On November 1, 2011, one of the most famous aviation accidents of the last few years took place in Warsaw. LOT Polish Airlines Flight 16 was scheduled to arrive at Warsaw Chopin Airport from Newark Liberty International Airport. Just 30 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft's hydraulic system failed. Although the pilots needed to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, they decided not to turn around and land in the U.S., but instead continue to fly. Shortly before landing at Warsaw Airport, the landing gear struts failed to deploy due to hydraulic failure. The pilots had to make an urgent decision and decided that the best option was to land the plane on the belly. They circled over Warsaw for about an hour, burning off the excess fuel and making the plane lighter so that it wouldn't explode on landing. Warsaw airport workers were warned about the incident, and the airport was temporarily closed for takeoffs and landings of all aircrafts. The runway was flooded with foam to prevent fires. The incident was caught on camera. The Boeing was seen coming in for a landing and making contact with the runway. The landing was quite rough, but very good. The Boeing didn't crash or catch fire. None of the 220 passengers died or was even injured. Pilots were subsequently presented with an award. There are even more incredible, amazing, and fantastic plane landings further in this episode, so stay tuned to see them all. Let's move on. What do you think can happen to an airplane if it ran out of fuel and as both of its engines failed at an altitude of 8.5 kilometers? Many of you would say that such an airplane would crash and everyone on it would be dead. In most cases, that is what would happen. But not when an experienced pilot capable of solving even such an incredible problem is at the helm. An Air Canada Boeing 767-233 was in flight AC-143 on the Montreal-Ottawa-Edmonton route, carrying 61 passengers and 8 crew members. At an altitude of 12 kilometers, the plane's fuel pump broke down and one of the engines failed. The pilots decided that the problem is solvable because the fuel was able to go to the engines by gravity for some time and an emergency landing was quite realistic. They began to lower the altitude, but at an altitude of 8,500 meters, the second engine failed. The airplane was out of power and most of the instrument panels on the dashboard went out. The pilots had only the backup instruments at their disposal. Fortunately, the pilot in command was Bob Pearson. He was not only an experienced aircraft pilot, but also an experienced glider pilot. Bob was familiar with planning techniques that were not used in commercial flights. Pearson planned the plane until he made a successful emergency landing at Gimli Motorsports Park, formerly used by the Royal Canadian Air Force. Remarkably, there was a race going on at the park that day, and there were many spectators. Pearson managed to stop the plane within 30 meters of the spectators. As a result of the incident, all 69 people on board survived. No one at the park was injured, and the incident's gone down in aviation history as the Gimli glider. To me, Bob Pearson showed fantastic skills and coolness. Blind landing. As you probably know, airplanes are designed so that they can withstand thunderstorms and lightning strikes. There's something scarier for planes than lightning. It's hail, which sometimes can be devastating. On July 27, 2017, an Airbus A320 flew from Istanbul Airport to Erkan, North Cyprus. At an altitude of 1,200 meters, the plane was caught in a severe thunderstorm. The thunderstorm was accompanied by a terrible hailstorm. According to reports from passengers and pilots, hailstones were the size of tennis balls. The hailstones did significant damage to the aircraft. They blew apart the prow of the aircraft, made several of the plane's systems inoperable, and shattered the glass in the cockpit. It was impossible to fly in such conditions. So the pilot in command, Akapov, decided to return to Istanbul Airport and make an emergency landing. As you understand, he was landing the plane blind. Akapov was only following instructions from the ground. In addition, he had to tilt the plane significantly to navigate through the side windows. The video shows the plane landing on the runway in a tilted position. However, the landing was successful and even quite soft. Thanks to the skills of the pilot, none of the passengers and crew of the plane were injured. Here we have another miracle that happened 10 years after the events on the Hudson River. On August 15, 2019, an Airbus A321-211 was on a scheduled flight between Moscow and Simferopol. The incident occurred right during takeoff when the plane collided with a flock of seagulls. Pretty similar to the incident on the Hudson River, isn't it? After the collision with the seagulls, one of the aircraft's engines failed. Seconds later, the second engine failed. The pilot in command made the decision to land the plane on a cornfield that was directly ahead. About 3 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft made a rough but successful landing on the field. While sliding across the field, the right engine came off. Despite such a rough landing, which was filmed from the plane by one of the passengers, all the people on board survived. The pilots were awarded the title of Hero of the Russian Federation, while the remaining crew members were awarded the Order of Courage. They did an amazing job. And finally, let me tell you about the amazing landing of the plane to which happened something worse than broken windows and failed engines. Get ready for a real shock content. Many people don't like to fly on airplanes. Most of them are afraid of even the little turbulence, which, as we know, does not cause plane crashes. Now, imagine what it was like for the aerophobes who flew on a Boeing 737-297, which roof was blown off during the flight. I think this is the worst nightmare of any aerophobe people and any man in general. The incident took place on April 28, 1989, when the Boeing was flying from Hilo to Honolulu. There were 89 passengers and 6 crew members on board. The takeoff and the first stage of the flight went perfectly. So what could go wrong? 23 minutes after the takeoff, the roof of the plane suddenly blew off. 35 square meters of fuselage covering just blew off the plane. As a result, the first 6 rows of the business class cabin were out under the open sky. While the plane was flying at 500 kilometers per hour, the passengers and flight attendants were exposed to the oncoming airflow and oxygen starvation. The cockpit door also tore off. When the pilot in command, Robert Schornsteimer, turned to see what had happened, he saw the blue sky. Fortunately, he kept his composure and, being a very experienced pilot, started an emergency descent. About 11 minutes after the fuselage covering came off the plane, he made a successful landing. According to the investigation, all the crew members were found not guilty of what had happened. The unreliable design of the aircraft was to blame. That's all, guys. Which of these unbelievable landings impressed you the most? Let me know in the comment section down below. Personally, I was amazed by the blind landing in Istanbul. And if you like this episode, subscribe to the channel, press the like button, and don't forget to stay notified of upcoming videos. Thank you for watching, and see you later.